We don't change our Constitution that much. We have people who talk about changing it all the time. We don't change it all that much, so that in 200 years, we've got about we have in the neighborhood of about 30 changes that we have. Of course, one of them was undoing one that didn't work too well. That's not a lot of changes, and most of the changes are substantial, important, principled changes, or changes that correct problems with the mechanism. It's not every little thing that comes up. In the Florida Constitution, and this isn't unusual, well, there are some unusual things, but not totally. Oops, I hit it too far and gave away the punchline. There we go. There are at least 5 ways the Constitution can be changed. The legislature can decide to propose a constitutional amendment, and then it would be voted on by the people. 60% have to approve. There is now going to be a Constitution Revision Commission that will meet once every 20 years, starting in 2017, which is another reason to keep voting and make sure you vote for state legislators and not just national elections. They will meet. They're appointed by all sorts of people. The governor appoints 15 people, the House appoints 9, the Senate appoints 9, the Chief Justice appoints 3, and the Attorney General is in there somewhere. And they meet and look at the Constitution and propose possible amendments that will come up for an election, and then they go to sleep for 20 years and come back and do it again. There's a proposal by initiative, and I won't go into the details, but citizens can say, we want some sort of amendment, and you have to get a certain number of signatures from a minimum of a certain number of congressional districts. I think you have to get a total of 15% of the people who voted in the last election to vote in terms of numbers. We could have a constitutional convention. And we've also now got the Taxation and Budget Reform Commission, which also meets once every 20 years, and it met for the first time last year, and they proposed several amendments, including 7 and 9. So the technical reason that 7 and 9 were thrown out was because the Budget and Taxation Commission is only allowed to deal with strictly budget and taxation issues. And they created these two, one of which they called the Religious Freedom Amendment. And one of the judges, Parienti, I think, said, they called it religious freedom. How much more proof do you need that they've gone way beyond their mandate? But they also decide on possible proposals for amendments that deal with revenue and taxation issues, and then they go to sleep for 20 years and come back again. But they just started last year. But you have all of these ways. Now, there are questions that come up, and they do relate to what we're talking about. But we sometimes get in our Constitution, in our Florida Constitution, things that absolutely don't belong there. Even if you're for them, they don't belong there. Even if they're brilliant, they don't belong there. We have constitutional amendments that allow Miami-Dade and Broward to make decisions about gambling and greyhound racing. Now, I'm not a big fan of gambling, but whether I'm for it or against it, that's supposed to be decided in the state legislature. That's too specific. That's too narrow for the Constitution. We have a constitutional amendment limiting cruel and inhumane confinement of female pigs, which I'm all for, but it has no place in the Constitution. That's not what the Constitution's for. And then we have other things, the thing about the high-speed transportation, things that have to do with tobacco education and stuff like that, all fine and good, but they don't belong there. But this raises some of the questions that I want to get to and that we have to be very careful about when we talk about the Constitution. There's a reason that there are initiatives for changing the Constitution. And there are reasons that there's a possibility for doing that that we might actually agree with in principle. Because almost everybody from time to time has a vague sensation that sometimes our elected officials aren't really dealing with the things we think they ought to deal with. And there should be some recourse. In a certain way, having the initiatives allows you to sort of give a kick in the rump to the legislators who aren't paying attention. My question is, why should it be an initiative to have a constitutional amendment rather than initiatives as they have in California or as they have in Switzerland for major pieces of legislation, which has an entirely different character, which does not alter the Constitution, which is your fundamental document? There are other ways of addressing that real democratic question without having it change the Constitution and put things like, let's take care of pregnant pigs properly in your Constitution. You can find other ways to address that problem. It's also possible, because of the way things work and because of the evil in the hearts of men and women, to subvert the Constitution in other ways. And again, this is exactly what happened with many of our recent amendments. The language sounds like it says X and the language says Y. Or the language is complicated and even a normal educated person is going to have a hard time understanding it. That shouldn't be on the ballot. That's exactly what the Supreme Court said about Amendment 5 and Amendment 9. This attempt to use these possibilities for changing the Constitution has been abused by these stealth issues. That would be my claim in the case of Articles 7 and 9 and 5, certainly, and I would even argue that Article 2 contains that. Article 2, or Amendment 2, is a little bit trickier, but I think there's a little bit of misleading language there as well, and we'll talk about that shortly. Are there any questions so far about what I've said? Because I'm throwing a lot of different things. Yes?
You know, you call them the forces of darkness, I call them right wing. They're always hollering about legislating from the bench.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that what this is doing when they put these amendments to the Constitution?
Well, they're not legislating from the bench, but they are legislating from some, place of privilege that they have. The Budget and Taxation Commission had no business tinkering with the article for religious freedom in the Constitution. Even if they were correct, they clearly exceeded their authority, and it wasn't, they weren't fooling too many people. But the argument about legislating from the bench, almost all high-ranking judges these days at the state level and the national level legislate from the bench.